In 1948, the nation of Israel was formed, a land once promised to God's chosen people that has become a center of conflict. Many political and religious institutions all agree.
We must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel.
But who exactly are God's chosen people, according to Scripture? Are the people occupying the land today even God's chosen people at all? Or has the church taken these three words, all with different meaning, and conflated them to be the same thing? YouTube, what's going on? It's your boy JR, Unleavened Truth, back with another video. Appreciate y'all rocking with me again. I'm pretty excited for this. We are finally jumping into my series called Reset. As I mentioned before, this channel, this whole purpose for me is about just removing the leaven from our households, removing the leaven from our spiritual walk, all the false doctrines and false teachings that just get in the way of us really understanding the Father, Yahuwah, and understanding his Son, Yahusha, and understanding our purpose in life. And I already know this is going to be a controversial topic, a controversial video. I don't care. It's about the truth for me. Nothing else matters. Now, if you didn't get a chance to check out my last video for this series, I put out a 10-question quiz. And, I said in the video, it's not about like judging you if you get answers right or wrong. It's just kind of like a personal litmus test, right? We all come from different backgrounds. If you've been a believer, maybe you grew up Baptist, Presbyterian, Lutheran. I was fortunate enough to actually kind of experiment socially when it came to church. I've been to a lot of different types of churches, Baptist, Lutheran, Free Methodist. The church I grew up in was non-denominational, Presbyterian. I've had a chance to experience a lot of them. And unfortunately, they all have these commonalities between them when it comes to some of these false teachings that we've been spreading and passing along from generation to generation. And obviously, in light of what's going on in the world currently with the war in Iran, the death of Charlie Kirk, you guys know I've been covering that here, and Charlie was a big voice against the war in Iran. And I feel like every time there's some type of conflict in the Middle East, Christian circles, church circles, we all seem to kind of come back to this age-old debate or the age-old saying of standing with Israel. We must protect Israel. God's chosen people is Israel. And again, a lot of that is just built on false doctrine. And if we had this conversation a couple years ago, I'd have been right in lockstep with everybody else, right? The Jews are God's chosen people, and we have to protect God's chosen people at all costs. And it wasn't until I started to recognize the leaven in my own life, in my own walk, that I started to really see the scriptures in a different light. And I think if we just taught from the word more often, we wouldn't have so many of these misconceptions. And I think you'll see here, if you stick with me through the end of this video, this is one of the easiest false doctrines to debunk or to clear up, because we've taken these words, Hebrew, Israelite, Jew, and we've just conflated them and combined them to all kind of mean the same thing. And scripture is super clear on this. They are not the same thing. And I think if we just had this understanding, the scriptures could open up in a whole new way for us. I mean, I've shared it in the past. I grew up in the church. I have been a believer, or at least in title, been a believer, a follower of Messiah my entire life. Now, I would probably say the last 2 years is when I've actually made my faith my own and actually try to develop a real authentic relationship with the Father. But I've been in this circle my whole life. So I already kind of understand the backlash or the retorts, the common arguments against what I'm about to say. So just understand that I'm coming from a place where I already kind of know where a lot of you might be coming from. And so I'm just here to kind of offer a fresh perspective and hopefully kind of bring these things to light and maybe change your mind on a couple things. So first, I think we got to start with the obvious. Okay. What is a Hebrew? What does it mean to be a Hebrew? So let's just go back to the text and read it. And I don't read the NIV. I'm just reading from it because it's the easiest to read. I actually read from the Hallelujah scriptures and the Sefer. I prefer the restored names of those in scripture, their Hebrew names. But I understand that that might be difficult for some people to follow along. So I'm going to read from the NIV here. In Genesis 11:1, now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." So this is where the story really begins, because and Genesis doesn't give us a whole lot of context, but if you've read Joshua, or if you've read Jubilees, or if you read the book of Enoch, we actually get a lot more context as to what's happening here. The leader of the free world at this time is Nimrod, and it's Nimrod who assembles all the people at Babel. Okay, this is Babylon. The reason it's even named Babel is because this is the place in verse 8 here. There the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them from over the face of the whole earth. So that's the scene, right? And here's where we get what they call the Table of Nations. Okay, this is basically genealogy breakdown. And it starts with Shem and goes all the way through to Abraham. Okay, but I want to highlight verse 14 here. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he became the father of Eber. And after he became the father of Eber, Shelah lived 403 years and had other sons and daughters. Eber is the first Hebrew. Okay, those who migrated with Eber, his descendants, including eventually Abraham, they're called Hebrews because they spoke the language of Eber. So Genesis 11 goes on to describe the genealogy. Eber begot Peleg, Peleg begot Reu, Reu begot Serug, Serug begot Nahor, so on and so forth, right? And eventually we get to Abraham. But to answer the question, who are or what is a Hebrew? A Hebrew is a descendant of Eber. Plain and simple. Okay? If you're a descendant of Eber, who was a descendant of Shem, you are a Hebrew. Okay? So, all Israelites are Hebrews. All Jews, ethnically speaking, are Hebrews. Keep that in mind. Now, if we go to verse 13 of Genesis 14, this is the first time the word Hebrew is actually used. This is when Abram is rescuing Lot. Okay? Verse 13, a man who had escaped came and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. Now Abram was living near the great trees of Mamre the Amorite, a brother of Eshcol and Aner, all of whom were allied with Abram. So this is the very first time that we even have the word Hebrew being used in the scripture, and it's used to describe Abram. Abram is a Hebrew. He is from the lineage of Eber. Okay? Hopefully we're on the same page here. Now, it's important to make this distinction, okay? Yes, Eber is the father of the Hebrews. Abram is a descendant of Eber. He is a Hebrew, okay? But not all Hebrews are Israelites. It's not until we get to Genesis 32 where we see Jacob wrestling with the angel in verse 28. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." So, Jacob, after wrestling with the angel, has his name changed to Israel. Jacob's 12 sons would then become the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? But there are plenty of descendants before Jacob, like Esau. Esau is a Hebrew. His father is Isaac. Isaac is a Hebrew. Okay? Isaac is not an Israelite. Esau is not an Israelite. And that's going to be very key later on. But there are plenty of those in scripture before Jacob who are descendants of Eber, but they are not Israelites. So, right away, one of the first arguments that we can debunk, okay, is that God's chosen people are the Jews. Okay? That is an incomplete thought because the promise was given to Abraham. Abraham is not a Jew. Abraham is not an Israelite. Abraham is a Hebrew. Now, real quick, we need to define what it actually means for God to make a covenant with a chosen people. Why did he make this covenant? Well, that actually goes back to Genesis 3. Okay? In the garden, after man sinned, the father gives a prophecy. Okay? The seed of the woman, which we know to be Messiah, will have enmity with the seed of the serpent, which we know to be the enemy. Right? So right away, we see a disconnect in bloodline. Okay? The seed of the woman, the seed of the serpent. The word here is the same for both. The word seed is nakash in Hebrew. Okay? This is talking about bloodline descendants. All right? So as we fast forward and we get to Abraham, to where the covenant was made, we have to understand that the primary principle of this covenant is preservation of the bloodline, right? He is going to use the father is going to use this bloodline specifically of all the nations in the world. This bloodline and this nation specifically is going to be the nation that he chooses to set forth the Messiah. And if you just follow in the Old Testament, a lot of the scripture is just preservation of genealogy, right? Making sure that we knew who begot who begot who, so that eventually, by the time the Messiah comes, he was able to be identified because these tribes of people were awaiting the Messiah to come from this specific lineage, specifically the tribe of Judah. So when churches today try to discount the bloodline aspect of the covenant and they want to say, oh, Israel is purely spiritual, it's just those who are believers, that's not true. Yes, it's partly true that you do have to be obedient to be in covenant with the Father. But the covenant is not just for those who believe. There are also parts of the covenant that are specific to the bloodline that is the house of Israel, of which Judah is only one of those 12 tribes. And that is where we get the term Jew. Okay? A Jew is a bloodline descendant of the tribe of Judah, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. So, again, just to make sure we're on the same page here, when we say that God's chosen people are the Jews, we are being very misleading, if not just outright lying. Okay? Yes, the tribe of Judah is part of God's chosen people, but they are a small part, 1/12, in fact. Okay? The covenant is with all the tribes of Israel, in addition to those who have been grafted in after Messiah by belief in the Messiah. And we'll get to that in a different video. But I just want us to understand that even if we just come to grips with the terminology, we can start to remove a ton of false doctrine from the church and from the body. But if we aren't willing to just simply observe what the text is clearly pointing out, that there's a stark difference between a Hebrew, an Israelite, and a Jew, well, we're going to keep passing along these doctrines of men that aren't rooted in scripture. Now, it is true that after Israel was captured by Babylon, and the kingdom split, the term Jew became a little more widespread because it didn't just apply to bloodline descendants of the house of Judah at that point. There were people living in the land who were not bloodline descendants who would still be considered Judeans or Jews, right? And that term expands even more after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, because we know that all of the tribes scattered at that point, And that was kind of the birth of what we call today Judaism, okay, which is basically a religion that was birthed from that time period. And it's more so based on oral tradition than it is on the written Torah. They call it rabbinic Judaism, right? So we have bloodline descendants of the house of Judah that are Jews. We have people living in the land of Judea that would be called Jews. And we have those that practice Judaism who would be called Jews. Okay. So that term itself has definitely kind of gotten splattered across history for sure. But the Jews are not the sole owners of the covenant with the Most High. That is biblically inaccurate. Now, just in case you think I'm off my rocker and I'm way off here, I want you to pay attention to Messiah's own words here in Matthew 15, because he also makes this distinction, right? He's talking to the Canaanite woman. Let's just read it. Leaving that place, I'm going to use his name, I'm sorry. Leaving that place, Yahusha withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, Lord, son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly. Yahusha did not answer a word, so his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. So Messiah himself makes this distinction. He is from the tribe of Judah, right? Keep that in mind. And he's still making the distinction. I am here for the lost sheep of Israel. Now, I believe it's in, let me check my notes here, 722 BC, okay? When the 10 tribes, which is everybody but Judah and Benjamin, they were scattered, okay, after being defeated by the Assyrians. And they did not return to the land. They are the lost sheep. So when Messiah says here, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel, that's who he's referring to. So if being a Hebrew, an Israelite, and a Jew all meant the same thing, why would Messiah make this distinction? It's because they're not the same thing. And we're going to dive deeper into this later on in the series. But I want to start with the terminology. If we can just get the terms right, we can be on better footing, on better common ground. So let's bring this back here, okay? We have 3 distinct terms: Hebrew, Israelite, Jew, okay? We've established a Hebrew is purely a descendant of Eber, okay? It does not mean that all Hebrews are Israelites. An Israelite is a bloodline descendant of the 12 tribes of Israel, formerly known as Jacob, okay? Jacob's brother, Esau, was not an Israelite, but he was a Hebrew, okay? And then we have a Jew. A Jew is a direct bloodline descendant from the tribe of Judah, okay? Benjamin, Reuben, Issachar, Dan, Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brother Judah, keep in mind, okay? These men, these sons of Jacob, were not Jews. They are not from Judah, okay? They are their own sect, their own tribe. And it's pretty easy to see why this distinction is so important. If we can't define these words correctly, we can't even identify who the covenant is with in Genesis 12. We don't even see it because we have these terms too conflated with one another. We keep intermingling them. But now, if we understand these terms a little better and a little differently, it opens up the lens of Scripture in a whole new way. We can start to really understand why the covenant was made, who the covenant was made with, why, for instance, the tribe of Dan was cut off from the covenant for disobedience, right? In my quiz, I mentioned it's not just being a bloodline descendant that makes you a covenant people. It requires obedience. How many times did we see this pattern in Scripture where the house of Israel disobeys, they get kicked out of the land? They go into slavery, right? Eventually, they're redeemed. They're brought back. They disobey. They get kicked out the land. They go into slavery. They eventually are redeemed and come back. It's a cycle over and over and over again. So their bloodline does not preserve them or make them special if they are disobedient. And the whole purpose of preserving their bloodline was so that they could readily identify the coming Messiah through that tribe of Judah. Again, I'm not here to try to force you to believe something. All right. If you are a believer and the word of the Father and the scriptures are your compass, then I'm telling you plainly what the text says. Okay. Sure. Does your pastor agree? Probably not. Does your seminary school agree? Probably not. I don't care. The scripture is pretty plain about who these distinct people groups are. And all we have to do is read the text and provide a little cultural context, and we can see it clear as day. And now that we know who these three groups are, the obvious question is, where did they go? What happened to those tribes, the lost sheep of Israel? What happened to Judah? What happened to Benjamin? And where do we go from here? Who are the people in the land who are calling themselves Jews today if they are not direct bloodline descendants of the house of Judah? And the answer to that question starts in Deuteronomy 28. But we're going to hold off on that for now. I just wanted to lay the groundwork. A lot of times when we have arguments of any kind, you could be arguing with a spouse, arguing with a friend. A lot of these arguments come down to semantics. Okay. So I've tried to learn whenever I'm having a conversation about anything, let's just define what we're talking about first. Once we can have a common ground about the definitions, then we can dive into what's right, what's wrong, what you believe, what I believe, so on and so forth. But I just want to lay the groundwork here and the foundation. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. If this video and others bring you value, please hit that like button, subscribe. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. Okay. Did any of this catch your eye? Is it brand new to you? Are you like me and maybe you've been kind of coming out of Babylon and kind of deconstructing some of these falsehoods that we built our faith on? If that's you, I want to hear from you. My whole purpose here is to kind of enlighten and to bring truth of Yah's word, and use that scripture as a framework to understand the world around us. So let me know what you guys think, man. Till next time.